So why do economies crash? For a long time, the answer has basically been a shrug, just some random, unavoidable shock that hits us out of nowhere. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the seeds of the bust are actually planted during the good times, during the boom? Okay, let's dive into a really fascinating theory that looks for the culprit in a place most others don't. To really get our heads around this theory, we first have to look at let's call it the mainstream story of how recessions happen. It's a story that, as you're about to see, kind of leaves out the most important part of the mystery. Believe it or not, this is a real analogy used by a Federal Reserve economist to explain the 2008 recession. The idea is the economy is just humming along, doing its thing. And then, bam, some external shock, a car, just comes out of nowhere and hits it. So the solution? Well, just get the guy back on the bike. Simple, right? But I don't know, it feels a little incomplete. Exactly. That's the million-dollar question. Where did that car come from? Was it a drunk driver? Were the brakes bad? Was the road unsafe? I mean, if we don't know what caused the crash, how in the world can we prevent the next one? The standard answer is often that these shocks are just random and unavoidable. But one school of thought has a very, very different answer. And this is the core idea we're going to unpack. This theory says the boom and the bust aren't two separate events at all. They're cause and effect. The boom is the problem, and the bust? Well, the bust is the inevitable and maybe even necessary correction. So if we're going to understand how things go wrong, we first need a really clear picture of what going right looks like. Let's build a quick model of a healthy, growing economy. Okay, the first concept we need to get is the structure of production. The super important thing to remember here is that making stuff takes time, and it happens in stages. You can't just build a car. First, you've got to mine the iron ore, then make the steel, then make the parts. You get the idea. It's a long, interconnected chain. This image here is a great way to visualize time in the economy. See, way over on the far left, you've got the earliest stages of production, things like mining or logging. And as you move to the right, you get closer and closer to a finished product hitting a store's shelf. And this right here, this is the engine of sustainable growth. It all starts with real savings. See, when you put money in the bank instead of spending it, you're not just saving money, you're freeing up real resources, stuff like bricks, steel, and labor that businesses can then borrow and invest to create better tools and more efficient factories. And that, ultimately, is how we all get wealthier. So you can think of this as our blueprint for a stable, healthy economy. The interest rate, the price of borrowing money, is the great coordinator. It perfectly balances the supply of savings from people putting off spending with the demand for investment from businesses that want to expand. When it's working right, everything is in perfect harmony. Okay, so that's the healthy system. But what happens when that great coordinator, the interest rate, starts sending out bad information? This, right here, is where the business cycle is born. The trouble, according to this theory, starts right here. A central bank can create new money and inject it into the banking system, making it available for loans. But here's the key. This new money isn't connected to anyone's actual decision to save more and spend less. It's created out of thin air. And you can see the effect plain as day on this graph. The supply of money available to borrow suddenly shoots up, which pushes the interest rate down. But this is a false signal. It's basically telling businesses that society has become more patient, that we've all saved up more resources for the future, when in fact, nothing of this sort has actually happened. And this false signal leads to a really crucial error, something called malinvestment. Entrepreneurs see this cheap credit and they're tricked. They're misled into starting these huge long-term projects, new factories, giant housing developments, that the economy doesn't actually have the real resources to support and finish. So this wave of malinvestment, it creates an economic boom, and it feels real. I mean, jobs are being created, construction cranes are all over the skyline, and everyone feels like they're getting richer. But it's a boom built on a foundation of sand. Let me use an analogy to make this crystal clear. Imagine a master builder. He looks at his supplies and he knows he has enough bricks to fully complete 4 houses. But then an artificially low interest rate is like a bad report that tells him he actually has enough for 6. So what does he do? He starts building 6 foundations. He's just created a huge problem for himself, but he doesn't even know it yet. Now, just picture that same thing happening all across the economy. A massive amount of investment starts pouring into those early stage parts of the production structure we saw earlier. We're talking mining, raw materials, heavy manufacturing. The boom is on. And here is the fatal flaw. People haven't actually decided to save more. They're still out there buying lattes and TVs and cars at the same rate as before. So the economy is trying to do two completely opposite things at the same time: invest way more for the future and consume way more today. There simply aren't enough real resources to do both. It's a tug of war. And a tug of war like that can't last forever. Eventually, reality has to catch up. The artificial boom must come to an end, and this is where the recession begins. So our builder suddenly realizes the price of bricks is skyrocketing. And why? Because every other builder who was also misled is trying to buy them too. He looks at his budget for those 6 houses and has that uh-oh moment where he realizes there's no way he can finish them. Entrepreneurs all across the economy are having this exact same realization. This is what's known as a cluster of errors. And this is the bust. Projects are abandoned, half-finished buildings sit empty, and workers are laid off. Economists show this using a production possibilities frontier, that curved line you see. A healthy economy is operating on that line, but during a bust, it falls inside of it, producing way less than it's actually capable of. This is the recession. So what do we do about it? How should policymakers respond? Well, this theory's recommendations, which you see on the left, are often the exact opposite of what we typically see happen. The theory argues that the economy needs to liquidate the bad investments and reallocate resources. But policies like bailouts, stimulus spending, and printing even more money can actually prevent this necessary healing process and just prolong the pain. And this brings us to the most counterintuitive and maybe the most important takeaway from this whole thing. We see the recession, the bankruptcies, and the unemployment, and we think that's the problem. But this theory argues that those are just the symptoms. The real sickness was the unsustainable boom that came before it. The recession is the economy's painful but necessary attempt to cure itself. And that leaves us with a really provocative question to think about. This theory forces us to look at economic booms with a much more critical eye and ask ourselves, is this growth real? Is it sustainable, built on a solid foundation of real savings? Or is it just an illusion, built on a foundation of sand, just waiting for the inevitable tide to come wash it all away?